We're coming to the next lecture. Christian Schwegal, I introduced a little bit the theme already and the person, but he's not only a Berlin-based journalist, but he wrote two influential books. And the main influence was the Menschen Zeit. It was published 2010, in English 2014. And this book and the research and work he did initiate, as mentioned, the Anthropocene project at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt. And it's a really amazing project. It's now finished.
Yep.
Somehow it's finished, because it went over 3 years, and the idea spread, and a lot of disciplines, scientists from a lot of disciplines took part. And also artists were involved, and there were different exhibitions, different symposia and other working groups which after the shows or the exhibitions worked on this communication about this theory or idea of the Anthropocene. For me always, or the starting point for this Anthropocene is for a lot of people this question, when did it start?
Yeah.
So, and then you are reading that and that and that, and maybe you are introducing the different theses about the starting point. For the moment, I'm for the idea to say it starts now. It has started maybe 2 or 3 years ago, as we now have this idea, and now we are discussing it. And maybe the Anthropocene has nothing at all to do with geology, something like that. But to say that it's an idea for the future and not for the past, maybe that might be an initiative for you for the talk.
Yep.
Enjoy, Christian.
Thank you very much. Hello, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the kind introduction, Gabriele. I really want to highlight that my book did have an influence on both the HKW and the project and the Deutsche Museum exhibition in Munich, which is ongoing, and you're all invited to come to Munich and see. It's, I think, the world's first special exhibition on the Anthropocene, and it's on until January at least next year, so do come to Munich. But there were a lot of other people involved. More influentially, Bernd Scherer conceived the idea of the big project, and Reinhold Leinfelder was involved at the very beginning as well, bringing in Deutsches Museum and so on, and then the whole curatorial team with Katrin Klingan and others. So it was a big teamwork, and I think a very good representation of Anthropocene ideas, because really what you already mentioned, we brought together, I think it was the first time perhaps in a long time, at least in Berlin, that a geologist and a psychologist, for example, shared one stage and got into a meaningful dialogue, I think. And so what I would like to do now in the next, 45 minutes or so, is to give you a quick run through what actually is behind this word Anthropocene, then relate the Anthropocene idea to your topic here, which is landscapes, I understand. I briefly want to touch on the question whether perhaps the Anthropocene is a dangerous idea, something we should reject. And then try and explore whether the opposite of what is normally seen as Anthropocene, which is a big mountain of environmental problems, is possible. And if we get together through all of this, I have a little treat for you at the end. So first of all, it's very important that Anthropocene has, from the derivation of the word, has nothing to do with anthropocentric. A lot of people think Anthropocene, it's the same as anthropocentric. But really, the scene in Anthropocene comes from the Greek word kainos and is for new. And this is a syllable that is used in geology to describe new chapters in Earth history. So Anthropocene basically means the new brought about by humans. Not men, but humans. That's very important. So it's not the age of males, which I think is, perhaps it's the age of male-produced problems. Yes, but certainly we shouldn't see it as the age of males, but humans. And I think it is part of a long history of philosophical ideas or cultural ideas of the place humans have on planet Earth and the connection we have with human Earth. So it's one of the big ideas, and you could think it comes from a very small subset of science, which is geology. So it could be a small idea, but really it is a big idea because it puts us humans on the time scale of Earth's history. So if you ask a normal historian, his time scale will perhaps start with the Pleistocene and the transformation of hunting and gathering to cities and agriculture and go into the modern period. But what the Anthropocene really does is extend the scope of human history to the planet, to the geological timescale, which is the biggest timescale we have available on the planet. And with that, I think it is in one line with all the other big ideas humans have developed over their history, starting from animistic cultures, and ideas which are still with us, and I think as modern as our more recent ideas of humans' position, to the idea of creation, to the idea of enlightenment, to the idea of humans as an engineer of an industrialized planet, and to the idea of the vulnerable planet. That is a very recent idea. And I want also to highlight that the Anthropocene should not be seen as the only way to look at time. And I think there is a danger in it that it kind of homogenizes our idea of time. It might have, with its scientific basing, it might have the approach to frame time in a universal sense, but it's important to see that there are other ways of framing time. For example, in South America, there is one culture that sees time in reverse and thinks of the future as the past and the past as the future. Or in Hindu culture, there is this idea of cyclical times that come back, like the age we are now in is called Kali Yuga in Hindu time measurement, and it's a dark age actually, characterized, for example, by migration, global migration of humans, and by people eating a lot of food based on wheat and other things, which is all pretty true and was conceived like 5,000 years ago. So Indian culture actually was much better at having a long time scale already a few thousand years ago, whereas Western culture for a very long time was stuck in the idea that Earth is, 6,000 years old, the biblical time scale. And it's only in the 18th century, really, that the Western culture expanded its horizon to what we now know is the real time scale of millions and billions of years of Earth history. When Comte de Buffon had the idea that Earth might be 75,000 years old, this was thought of as heretical, and he was totally afraid of what the Catholic Church would do with him. Already then James Hudson had sort of a more open idea in the 18th century of Earth is very old and there is no prospect of an end. But it took very long, and actually the realization that Earth is, 4.3 billion years old is only something that happened in the 20th century. But I find it really important that what is the result of geology in the past 150 years, this skyscraper-like layering of time is just one approach to time. And I think of it as a very inspirational approach to time, but still we should be aware of this. So this is what geologists have come up with, and you know some of these names like the Jurassic and the Trias and the very last subchapter actually of Earth's history we are in now is the Holocene, which started with the end of the last ice age. So ice ages have been coming and going for quite some time through the previous period, the Pleistocene, and they ended about 12,000 years ago, and that's when geologists said that's the end of a geological epoch, and now something totally new, and Holocene doesn't mean more than totally new, has started. So the Anthropocene then is the idea that the Holocene is over and something new has started, which is the age or epoch of humans. And this happened in the year 2000 when this man, Paul Crutzen, stood up in a scientific conference in Mexico. And there was a lot of debate there within a scientific meeting of the International Biosphere Geosphere program, which Gloria already mentioned, about the Holocene. And Paul stood up and said, look, the Holocene is basically over. We are now in the, and he was kind of lost for words. And then he said, we are now in the Anthropocene. This one man, I would think, has done a great job at bringing this word to the attention of other scientists first. It was then discovered that another scientist had also used the word, Eugene Stoermer, more informally, and they got together afterwards and wrote a paper together formalizing, introducing the word Anthropocene to the scientific community. I think it's yet another story of, it's not one man who did something, but he is embedded, Paul Crutzen, in a history of ideas. You see on the top left, Eduard Suess, Austrian scientist who coined the word biosphere. You see Teilhard de Chardin, and below on the stamp, Vladimir Vernadsky, Russian geologist, geochemical scientist, who already framed this idea of humans as a geological force. You see Rachel Carson there. And you see Eugene Stoermer. I think the reason why Paul Crutzen had this idea is very obvious. He is the person who probably contributed most to the discovery of the hole in the ozone layer and the fact that there are chemical substances that punch holes into the very protective layer around our planet that has made life on land possible. And in the late 70s, he started work on the question which chemicals might harm the ozone layer. It's actually quite interesting to know that Paul Crutzen has no formal training in chemistry and became a Nobel laureate in chemistry. He's a civil engineer who built bridges in the Netherlands in the 50s because his family couldn't afford proper studies in natural sciences. So he became an engineer, built bridges first in Amsterdam, then he built houses in Sweden, and he got totally bored doing that. So one day he saw an ad in the newspaper that offered a job as a computer programmer in the Institute of Meteorology in Stockholm. And he knew nothing about meteorology, and he knew nothing about computer programming. But he applied out of some intuition, and he got the job. So on the job, he could prove that he was a very good natural scientist, moving all the way up to the Nobel Prize in 1995, I think, for his work contributing to the detection of the ozone problem. And this experience that, the gases that punched the holes in the ozone layer, they were like stuff from deodorant cans and things like that. And this experience that, something that was invented for actually the good, cooling gases and so on, accidentally, yet another accident, would cause an existential problem. This scared the hell out of Paul Crutzen. It really gave him nightmares because he said, if we do this by accident, what else do we do by accident in the future? And this opened up this line of thinking. He doesn't come from sort of environmentalism in that sense. He's a very tough natural scientist, and he had this fear. And that made him start a long list of human-induced changes to planet Earth. And I think that led then to this diagnosis called the Anthropocene. Now, we heard a lot about limits from Gloria. But with the Anthropocene diagnosis, there is more or less connected this graph that is showing almost limitless developments. And you don't need to look at all of them. I think it still includes the number of McDonald's restaurants in the world, the deforestation rate, GDP, and other indices of consumption and what we call economic development. The diagnosis here is that at least since the Second World War, something new is on its way, a colossal global change of huge dimensions, which is not only reflected in climate change, but on a lot of different, in a lot of different arenas. And this is called what Stefan and Crutzen, they call it the great acceleration of consumption, of material turnover, and of human impact on what is then called the Earth system, which is another fancy term. This is just briefly the paper Eugene Stoermer and Crutzen wrote in 2000, which has now produced this amazing global debate. You can really say that now the Anthropocene idea is a global idea. It's discussed worldwide, and that's a very recent thing. And very recently also, it made the front page of Nature magazine in March with a paper that discussed the beginnings. When should we, first of all, if the Anthropocene is a scientific reality, not just something we feel as a reality because we see how much humans change Earth. But if it is a change that is in line with the criteria of geology, then where do we draw the line? Where does this new chapter in Earth history start? And at the moment there are, I see, 4 or 5 competing ideas for that. One is called the early Anthropocene hypothesis, which says basically the Holocene and Anthropocene are very much the same, because with 12,000 years ago, that's when cities started, that's when agriculture started, that's when technology in a deeper sense started. So this is basically one thing, and we just rename the Holocene into Anthropocene. We kind of replace it. A second idea when to draw the line is very recent. Actually, it was with this paper that it was presented, and I felt that a lot of people were pretty surprised. It's the idea that the Anthropocene started in the year 1610. Why 1610? Because at that point, the genocide that took place in North America with millions of native Indians dying from introduced measles and from general warfare of Europeans against them, led to an evacuation of North America. Before, there were many millions of Native Americans living there and having turned the forest into buffalo hunting grounds. Now with their death, the forest came back. And this is then the wilderness the Europeans that came in the second and third wave encountered. They thought that they had come into a wilderness, a forest wilderness. But no, it was a post-genocide landscape. This regrowth of the forest was so immense that it led to global carbon dioxide levels going down, because the forest that grew after the native Indians had died sucked up so much carbon out of the atmosphere that you could see a global drop in CO2 levels, and a cooling, actually, a small cooling associated with it. So these guys here in that Nature paper, they say that is a genocide starting a global cooling wave. That is something that marks the Anthropocene. So you already see that, and I mean the next idea is 1945, nuclear blasts, and the beginning of the spread of plastic. So both markers of the Anthropocene aren't really reflecting nicely on our species, one has to say. The last one, the one in the middle, would be 1800. That's the one Paul Crutzen has presented, the invention of the steam engine. So you would put that so-called golden spike for each geological epoch. There is a place on Earth that represents it symbolically, and so you would place that in the in the shed in which the first steam machine was invented. But all of this, and particularly this, presents the Anthropocene as a very clean and very hierarchical idea. What I think, and many other people think, is that it's a much more fuzzy and a much more complicated and thing that can't be reduced to a single marker like a nuclear bomb being exploded in the Nevadan desert. You have to understand and you have to look into and throw into the debate the whole of Earth's history, which we grew out of and which we now are the result of. Human consciousness, the number of humans, this great acceleration I talked about, some physical boundaries like the availability of certain resources, but also values and rules. The distribution of power is important in the Anthropocene. Money flows. You have now money flowing on computers around the world. Every day there are hundreds of billions of dollars or euros moved around the world, and they determine today what ecosystems look like tomorrow. And this is something that is also almost a geological thing. Money is a geological product, as it was made of gold and copper, so it was taken from the earth, turned into pure metals, and then represented this scarcity which our economic system likes so much. But now we have digital money, which is also a geological thing because the hard drives are a geological product made from copper and iron and everything. So money flows are very important. The technology, human inaction, I think, is something that is very important for the Anthropocene. But it's not only humans doing things, it's also what the biosphere and nature does with it. How does it react? Or what does it do on its own? So, for example, there is this idea that there is not only a human-induced warming on this planet, but there is a natural post-glacial warming that started 12,000 years ago. And climate skeptics who question the models and say the models of climate change are not true, they say it's all part of a natural warming tendency. So, but what if both is true? There is a natural warming tendency, and on top, we have the human-induced carbon dioxide warming. So also, it's not just what humans do, but what nature does on its own, or the biosphere does on its own. And then there is this whole dimension of the new, the innovation, and the societal evolution. And I think that is very much tying into Gloria's discussion on limits. So do we see the world as a representation of limits of growth, or do we see it in terms of growth of limits, for example, through innovation or through new value systems? So, for example, if you have a development where the Americans would stop to waste materials on a level that they do now, you will have a totally different pathway of the Anthropocene, or the Europeans become a really green cultural space, and then suddenly the whole thing looks totally different. And then there are the many unknowns. So this idea of calculability, I think, is only there in a very small subset of people who are concerned with the Anthropocene, because the wider group is more aware that if perhaps we can diagnose the present, but certainly we cannot put the models, we cannot assume that our current models are what you said are the reality. I have covered a lot of the climate conferences of the United Nations since 1995. And I have to say that there I experienced that the researchers who were there, they always wanted to emphasize uncertainties. But who really wanted certainty in terms of the models was the politicians, because they have to direct taxpayer money in one direction or the other, and they want certainty. So they don't want to discuss uncertainty. They don't want to discuss models. They want clear answers, and if the scientists cannot provide clear answers, they get replaced in their advisory positions. So I see it coming more from this direction. Yeah, but Paul Crutzen famously, my perspective famously. When I picked him up at the airport and to take him to the HKW project, he got into the taxi and he said, Christian, what is the Anthropocene really? I don't know. And I think that is a very important thing, that the man who is very closely associated with it thinks of it as an open process, as something that is not yet explored, and there is no canonical knowledge, there is no ideology about it. It is a more or less open idea that is an invitation to think about it. So, to get closer to the topic of your academic year here, I want to go through some landscapes which I consider as representative of Anthropocene phenomena. And surely this is the baseline here. This is a rainforest in the heart of the island of Sumatra, where I was hiking a couple of years ago. And even there, this is sold as untouched nature to tourists like me. But even there, it is very unfair to say it is untouched nature, because you have people living there for a very long period and taking care of this forest by living there. And you can see in a lot of places that where you remove indigenous people, what unfortunately still happens today, that indigenous people are removed for the sake of conservation, but then conservation collapses because nobody's there anymore to take care of the forest, to fend off the criminal loggers that come in. And so here you have a long history of human settlement in this forest, but it's invisible. And it's also geologically invisible. So these people have a way of life that makes them geological invisible, yet sustaining this amazing ecosystem. Now, it's funny that this idea of untouched nature is also often, when you look at tourist catalogs, what they try to sell you is often placed on landscapes that are very much a part of human history. So in the surroundings of Berlin or in Bavaria, you see catalogs advertising untouched nature, or paradise even, where really what you go into is a cultural landscape. So you see here a cultural landscape very typical of Europe, and one that's very typical of the island of Bali, we've already heard about today. So there is a great number of landscapes that have been shaped by human needs. And this is still going on, but this is producing new cultural landscapes, which don't reflect really nicely on us humans. This is the history of human expansion. So you see that 300-400 years ago, probably a vast majority of land in that sense was wild, I wouldn't say unpopulated, but not fundamentally changed. Whereas today, this is work done by Earl Ellis. Today, the diagnosis is that about 66% of the land surface of Earth has been used by humans in one way or another, or changed by humans. So here are Anthropocene landscapes. We already talked about cities as Anthropocene landscapes. They only cover so far 2% of Earth's land, but this might double in the next decades. And think of this as a future geological layer, and that's, I think, the big difference between a geological idea and an ecological idea. So the garden Gloria talked about, what we talk about in the Anthropocene is the garden eternalized. The garden that leaves a mark for the next 100,000 years, or 1 million years, or 100 million years. A garden that becomes like a tattoo on the Earth's surface and stays there. So what we look at in terms of the Anthropocene are marks that stay almost forever, that will be visible to a geologist who comes in 100,000 years, the famous hypothetical geologist who will visit Earth in 100,000 or 500,000 years and tries to understand what has been going on. So he will find this really strange layer of glass, metal, and stones that must have originated in totally different parts of the planet, because this is Paris, for example, seen from the Eiffel Tower. Sure, the material that is there has not only been excavated in France, but some might be from Egypt, for example, or brought in from some colonial parts of the world. And the glass, the sand for the glass has come from places. And so think of this as a sediment, and then you have a funny mix of substances from all over the place. And to give you an idea of how important this will be for the geology of planet Earth, look at this protected map of spread of cities worldwide. So in the top left, you have this amazing city that is in the making that stretches over something like 1,500 or 1,800 kilometers along the Chinese east coast, or even more, looking at it now. So a mega city that has hundreds of millions of inhabitants. So what this means is that the city becomes a new form of nature. It's not that small island anymore that draws resources from somewhere. It is, by definition, because it covers such vast areas, it is a form of nature. Same happening in West Africa and Turkey. Now, another form of Anthropocene landscape for me is so-called sacrifice zones. I don't know if you've read Naomi Klein's new book. It's a term borrowed from her, sacrifice zones, areas that are now sacrificed to our consumerist needs, and these areas are large. Think of the tar sand areas in Alberta. Think of the rainforest you see here that is turned into soy plantations. And already we have lost about 50% of world forests in the past, 200 years. And this is an ongoing process. You do have some regrowth of forest, but the forest loss is much bigger. And of course, what is triggered by this is erosion. So erosion is yet another marker of the Anthropocene. You take soil from the land, put it in the sea, basically, and this is something that is very permanent, that a geologist of the future will see. Now, this is also a landscape, an Anthropocene landscape. It's an inverted landscape. Because if you go into that supermarket and walk along the shelves, what you have in the shelves is concentrated ecosystems. Every single product you have in the shelf is a concentrated ecosystem. Now, think of wine as a particularly nice concentrated ecosystem. But think of your crunchy muesli, which has sugar from Brazil in it, and which has palm oil from Indonesia in it, also as a synthesized ecosystem with a global impact, and an impact that can be very long-lasting. Now, we have the extraction landscapes, and this is negative geology here. So you don't add to the geology, but you take away stuff. And so these holes, these huge holes we are creating, and the tunnels we create to extract coal, copper, iron, and so on. These leave permanent marks. And so Jan Salasiewicz, one of the leading Anthropocene scientists, he has hypothesized that this scientist who comes in 100,000 years, he will think that humans were huge worms, because you have these tunnels going through the earth, right? And some of the first animals, multicellular animals, 500 million years ago, there were worms digging little tunnels in the ocean floor. And this is how the big transition from the Precambrian to the Cambrian period is defined by these little tunnels that the animals have gone. Nobody finds, they were very soft, so they have left the geological record, and they now live within us as carbon molecules. But the tunnels, they are still there. And so when this Anthropocene scientist comes in 100,000 years, he might think we've been huge worms doing tunnels. You have nitrogen landscapes in the Anthropocene. This is something that is overlooked, I think, and I'm just trying to write articles about this topic. We focus so much on carbon dioxide and climate that we forget that nitrogen really is another substance that is changing the planet. Nitrogen is, of course, the fertilizer used to grow our food, and without nitrogen, let's see, roughly along this line, right? All of you here, you would not be around here, right? don't want to be unfair to this side. 40%, 50% of you would not be here without the Haber-Bosch procedure that allows to extract nitrogen from the air and turn it into fertilizer. And this Haber-Bosch procedure is 100 years old, and it has totally changed our planetary metabolism because nitrogen makes things grow. And what happens is the overgrowth of algae in the oceans. So that's how dead zones in the ocean come into existence. And what also happens is that ecosystems that used to be very diverse in species, they become monotonous because there are some species of plants that really are very happy to feed on nitrogen, and then they can outgrow all the other plant species, and suddenly you only have a few species left. Looking around, some of you, my active are, no, not my age, but so 40 years ago, 30 years ago, the Löwenzahn dandelion, right, as a flower. So people hated the idea that there were all these dandelion meadows around because they replaced the very diverse meadows of the past. Now today we are happy when we see a dandelion meadow because it has become even more monotonous, right? Because now it's only grass, and this is due to nitrogen. So this one substance has a systemic effect on the ecosystem. And the same happens with carbon, of course. This is a plant I have photographed in that rainforest in Sumatra. But think of it as a product of carbon that has gone through your car. You've been driving with that car. You've been blowing carbon molecules into the air. The molecules travel with the air, and they land in Indonesia, become part of this plant. So through our consumption of fossil energy, we kind of pervade all of the biosphere with carbon molecules that would not be around without us. Plastic is, of course, a very popular form of carbon, and it's now everywhere, and we will hear a lot about it tomorrow. Now, another Anthropocene landscape is the global wastelands. This is Ghana, where a lot of our electronic waste goes. This is a geological layer, and again, this hypothetical scientist coming back in 100,000 years, he will still find the electronic waste landscapes there. This is a landscape in London, and I have strong feelings about this, that the Anthropocene at the moment really is sort of piling up so much rubble that we acquire a permanent place in history. But we should really try and think beyond that. One very nice example, but this again is more or less of an accident, which we can't build on, is this beach in California, at Fort Bragg in California, where about 40 or 50 years ago, a lot of old bottles were dumped along the shore, something we would consider, of course, as an ecological crime to dump waste almost into the ocean. But here's something beautiful has happened. The water has washed the bottles to such an extent that they have become these beautiful stones. Or not stones, but glass here, and it's now called Glass Beach. And actually, people go there now, and it's a nature reserve now called Glass Beach. And so many people go there now to pick glass that they think about replenishing it, throw more bottles into it to make it an even better nature reserve, right? But this is an accident, I would say, a positive accident, and there aren't too many positive accidents, unfortunately. There should be much more positive accidents along this line, but there aren't. Okay, another Anthropocene landscape that is in the rise, in the making, is this techno landscape. This is a set of cows built by DARPA, the American military agency, now acquired by a company you all know, Google. And we will see Google just leased a huge airport in California to test these things. These gadgets, of course, along with all other gadgets we produce, will also become part of the geological record. But at the moment, this is a beginning, I think, of a technoization of our landscapes. Also, there are Anthropocene nanolandscapes. These are flowers that are, I think, 20 nanometers large, produced by chemists, nanochemists at the University of Harvard. That's not an accident, but it's a very beautiful result of fascinating research. Anthropocene landscapes also include electromagnetic landscapes, and I'd love to make the electromagnetic signals that are around us visible for us, because the early Anthropocene scientists, they talked about the noosphere, the sphere of the spirit that is added to, there is the hydrosphere of the oceans, there is the biosphere, and the lithosphere and the atmosphere. And these guys already in the 19th century talked of the noosphere of the human spirit. Now, the electromagnetic landscape that is around us very much is that noosphere. It's the sphere of signals traveling through us, through our bodies, and they are everywhere. And they very much also direct the flow of materials, the flow of money, the flow of ideas, and should be seen as landscapes, but can't be seen, and that's why the NSA can tap into our lives without being caught most of the time. It's just important to realize that invisible things are part of the Anthropocene as well. And then there's what I would call mindscapes, because we not only kill biodiversity, and that is much discussed, the loss of species, but we add to the biodiversity of our planet. And that means that our human mind starts directing evolution, which is a very fundamental change. You have the Darwinian evolution, which is called blind and non-targeted. But then now you add to it anthropogenic evolution, directed evolution, which leads to new forms of life, which become part of the biosphere and part of future life. And perhaps the one organism that will outlive us is this creature here, a synthetic bacterium that is developed in the Craig Venter's laboratory in the United States, put together atom by atom, molecule by molecule in the laboratory, a life created. And who knows, perhaps that is the most persistent creature around, and our hypothetical geologists in the future will experience that as the last survivor of the Anthropocene. I want to close this quick journey through a number of different Anthropocene-type landscapes with something I think is not translatable into English, the Sehnsuchts landscapes. You see here an advertisement by a company, Apple, very much building on our nature deficiency now in cities, marketing our longing for nature, also marketing the purification of nature, this idea of pure nature. So it seems that the further removed we become from nature and the more we manipulate nature, the more we long and distill this idea of pure nature. But this idea is over. And this is actually, I think, a good thing, that nature becomes culture and culture becomes nature. If you look at the whole thing on a subatomic level, everything is nature anyway. If you look at it on a cosmological level, everything is nature anyway. It's just our kind of mesosphere of human perception that we think of culture. I think now is the beginning of mutual, almost fertilization of both spheres. And we very much tried to express that with the Anthropocene project in Berlin, bringing together really people from totally different areas of thinking. You see Elizabeth Povinelli and Matt and her shared a memorable debate, which I recommend to you. Everything we did there is on YouTube and the HKW site to look at it again. There you can see Anthropocene discourse in action. And the same we tried to express with the exhibition in Munich, where, for example, we show the evolution of dogs and the evolution of razor blades almost next to each other. And we show coral reefs knitted, gehäkelt by humans. And we show hypothetical fossils of the future. This is what Yesenia Thibault made of a scenario exercise, a potential plastic fossil that will be found by, again, our hypothetical geologists in the future. Now, there is one aspect that the Anthropocene often is symbolized by tough stuff, like the landscapes I presented, like the problems from climate change to biodiversity loss I presented. But then there's another negative side to it, which is the question whether the Anthropocene idea itself might be a dangerous thing. And I totally sympathize with exploring this. So I'm not trying to do Anthropocene propaganda in a sense. I think it's really important to explore this, because once it's in the school books that we live in the Anthropocene, it's really hard to undo it, and then we will have to live with it for a very long time, perhaps for 10,000 or 50,000 years. So better think now before doing something too early, or putting an idea into the world that hits back and has negative side effects, like so often that good things, the good intentions lead to bad outcomes. So one line of criticism that I think is really important is even, there is the etymology is different, but is it placing too much emphasis on the human action? Is it making perhaps us blind for what we really live from? That's the bacteria and the fungi and the air and the unmodified air and everything else. So is it kind of leading to a tunnel vision that makes us blind for what we really live from? And there my take would be that this is a danger, yes, but it might just be that important idea to make us aware of just how much we change Earth. And by placing us into the Earth's history, it might make us less anthropocentric, but that is still a challenge, and I will get to that in a minute. Now, is it perhaps a tool to justify human entitlement and exploitation? Again, this is very important. Does it mean we own the Earth and can master it and can change it as we like it? Again, I would say no, don't. But this is something that's around, and I already see it used in that way. Is it because Paul Crutzen has used the idea of geoengineering as an example? He didn't promote it in a strict sense, but is it a synonym for that only? Or does it blur responsibility? It's like Sippenhaftung, so you make all of humans responsible for the ecological crimes instead of those who emit the CO2, for example, whereas the people in Ethiopia or India contribute very little. So by using anthropos, then suddenly all of us are responsible for the bad stuff, and it's kind of, yeah, it's okay, it's the humans altogether that do it, while really it's power structures and a particular subgroup of humans who cause the biggest problems. And I think that is also very important. And then, if it really is only the sum of all environmental problems, then I really think we should try and stop it. We should form an organization, the anti-Anthropocene group, action group, and try to fight the Anthropocene to death, actually. Because if it is this total nightmare, and if the message is we will live with this nightmare for the next 50,000 years, then, do you want it? No, I don't think so. There are only a few people who will want it, those who earn the money with it now in the next 10 or 50 years. So my whole exploration really is then on the question, is there an alternative Anthropocene possible? And just very briefly, 10 points, but I will only say a few sentences for each point, so we can have a bit of a discussion. But I think this is important because otherwise the whole dystopic notion will become so strong, and the apocalyptic notion will become so strong. And I see what Gloria has said with those lines in the projections crossing the logarithmic development of like human growth and the linear growth of resources only. We have almost never thought beyond the crossing point, and I think that's where the interesting stuff is. A, is this crossing point real? but B, out of this idea of the crossing point, this whole eco-apocalypse has arisen, the end of the world idea. 2050, we hit this wall. So, but what then? And I think the Anthropocene, first of all, tells us there is, like James Hutton has said, there's a long history ahead of us. So we shouldn't console ourselves with the idea that there is an apocalypse. There won't be an apocalypse. We will have to live with what we do for a very long time, and our kids and grandkids will have to live with it for a very, very long time. So I've just read that you have to add 6,000 grand or Ur to arrive at the first modern human being. So 6,000 Urgroßvater or Großmutter, and then you get back to first Eve and first also male. So add 6,000 futures. We have no word for that still. 6,000 times into the future, 6,000 generations into the future. I think that's how far the Anthropocene idea should make us think. So overcoming short-termism, both in terms of our economy, because we now live in a super short-term economy, and the financial crisis actually has made us even more short-term than we were before, not less. It should have made us less short-term, but now the so-called solutions become ever more short-term, and also the profit-making becomes ever more short-term. This is one thing, one form of short-termism, Kurzfristigkeitsdenken, and another form of short-termism is this idea of the eco-apocalypse. So I think from both sides there is a very bad short-termism, and the Anthropocene, by being geological, I think should make us breathe in a way to see ourselves on this long timescale. So it should be the sense of a not end. That's a great book, The Sense of an Ending, but the sense of a beginning. Second is to think of our human systems not as something separate from nature, but as nature. The iPhone as a representation of 40 different mountains from which the metals it is made of have been taken. And we should try and change our human systems in a way that they function as ecosystems. So put a bog in the middle of the forest. Use farming in the forest. There is already this trend. Recycle all materials, not just 20%, but completely. Design cars that can be recycled 100%. I think cars are already pretty advanced, but computers are not. The same with agriculture. We still think of agriculture as extractive, but it needs to be regenerative. When are we starting to give back to the soils, if not now? But we don't. We take. That's the problem. And if you go through the German landscape, it has become ever more industrial. 30 years ago, I tried to plant hedges with my friend in Bavaria. I now come back to Bavaria. I have to say, at the moment, we have lost the war, the cultural war. The landscape is empty there. There are no hedges there. And there is nothing what you could call a green infrastructure. Perhaps I'm making it a bit too dramatic, but I see this zombification of our landscapes going on. And what we need is giving back to the landscapes. Now, this is another accident for you, very positive accident in an ecological sense, not in a human sense. In a human sense, it was a catastrophe. This is the former East-West German border. And of course, it was a human tragedy and should never have been there. But what it has given birth to is the longest nature reserve in the world, which is stretching actually from North Finland to the Black Sea now. And so this is a vein that goes through the landscapes. And I think we need more of these genetic highways, in a sense, where the plants and animals can propagate as like veins of our landscapes than we used to have, and without building walls, right? Without needing the Mexican-US wall or the German wall for such ecological progress in a sense. Yeah. So making technology compostable, I think, is super important because so far the technosphere really feeds on the biosphere. You could call it a parasite on the biosphere. And in a sense, it needs to become part of the biosphere. That poses dangers. Think of bio-adaptive drones run by the US military, colibris or hummingbirds developed by the US military. But that doesn't make making technology compostable a less urgent thing. Now, fundamental economic question, of course, is this competition for resources. And it's again something that connects environmentalism and capitalism, is the love for scarcity. So we love the scarce animals, for example. We don't love the abundant animals. We love the scarce resources because they are so expensive. But let's think from an angle of abundancy, and let's try and build an economy around sharing resources and not competing for them. This is very idealist, but you might call it utopian. But I would think what we do now is utopian. Utopia means without a place, and what we do now is, in a sense, without a place. Whereas the sharing economy, and I don't mean Airbnb and Uber, but real sharing economy is non-utopian in a sense. Climate change becoming energy smart, it's a no-brainer, I would think, even despite the uncertainty in the climate models. This, I think, is what the Anthropocene should really give us, this sense of connectedness, that we understand, not that we place ourselves on top of the ecological, what's called the food chain, and I don't think there is a food chain because the bacteria eat the humans and the whales and all the other animals at the so-called top of the food chain. There's a food cycle, and we should really build that into our cultural conception of nature. And I would hope that the Anthropocene is a vector for that transformation, that the Holocene is the era of human narcissism and egotism in a sense, and the Anthropocene is the era of human connectedness. And this, of course, means that we will make our economy a subset of ecology, something Humboldt, who I'm very grateful that you highlighted him so much as an Anthropocene pioneer, already asked for, that we should see our economic activity as a subset of what's going on this planet. At the moment, all the guys in Wall Street, London, Frankfurt, they are totally blind to what sustains our lives. And we have to remove the dark glasses from their eyes and make the value that's in a living nature visible. So at the moment, a living rainforest that sustains biodiversity and that gives people free food and everything is worth nothing, right, in the books. Whereas when it's cut down, then it costs money. And so somehow this has to be changed. I don't think that placing a money value on everything is the solution, but this should be the hottest debate in economics. Okay, we have 2 more to go, and then you get your treat, right? I think the internet is a really big opportunity in the Anthropocene, and we now talk of the Internet of Things. But what is meant by that in the Californian capitalist logic is, of course, to connect commercial things, like fridges, cars, medical appliances, and this is all very good. But what I think it should really become is an Internet of all things, where the Earth is represented, in a sense, through an electronic nervous system we build, where the interest of other species feeds into the internet. Like a rare species, when they become rarer, they can send emergency signals, automatic emergency signals, into our internet. Or when there is a negative change in some part of an ecosystem, we somehow register it through a network of sensors. And this, I think, can be all summarized in a new idea of materialism, because we now have, I don't think we really, it's always said we live in a materialist society. I actually don't think we live in a materialist society, because then we would love materials. But we love the waste of materials, and we love the turnover of materials. We love to have materials and then throw them away. But we don't cherish the materials. And to see the algae in the coal, to see the bacteria that produced our iron in the iron we use, to see the muscles that have produced the chalk that is in our concrete, our beton, to become aware of the life that's in what we call dead, and to start to think in cycles and not in throwaway consumerism, and to love the life that's in those materials, not just to use it as a means, but as an end. That would be materialism, not only for me, but there are far bigger thinkers on this, like Jane Bennett, who is exploring that. So perhaps that is something that the Anthropocene, which is its big focus on material flows, should bring us, not just say, the carbon flow is so bad or the nitrogen flow is so bad, but how can we create a carbon flow we love? And I think the idea of decarbonization actually is not really good. We should try and carbonize our lives in a positive way, like carbonize the soils. And we should start love carbon, because carbon is the element of life. If we hate carbon, this is like an anal retention thing, you know. If we hate the stuff we are made of, that's a horrible thing. I mean, we are all made of carbon, and this carbon has been flowing around the Earth system for millions of years. So we are all these mosaic of past plants and past animals. The whole body is a mixture of evolutionary stories and everything. So love the carbon. Don't hate it. Don't decarbonize. And so when I was on the island of Bali, on my Indonesia trip, I encountered this culture of offering there. Of course, there is a tourist angle to it. In this scene, not so much. And I think, the history of it, of course, is non-touristic, giving back, giving parts of what you have back. And I think we should have more new cultural practices like this. We have Erntedankfest, so the day when you thank God for the yield in Europe. But I think the green movement really has fallen short of developing new cultural practices. So my idea would be that we introduce an anti-Earth Day once a year. Because now we have this Earth Day, you all know it, where you switch off the light and you behave ecological and so on. But we only have it once a year. I think that's a very strange cultural practice. So my idea would be to introduce an anti-Earth Day, where once a year we can go out and shoot every animal we encounter or kill it in the most brutal way. We can pour toxins into the rivers and we can eat the most horrible stuff. And then 364 days a year, we have Earth Day, okay? Or Earth Year. And I hope that the Anthropocene idea is paving the way for developments like I described. This, of course, is my very personal interpretation. So in the Anthropocene project in Berlin and in the Munich exhibition, and in my book, I was part of trying to explain explore the Anthropocene idea. But then last week I came across an exploration of the Anthropocene idea, which I think is hard to do better. And that's why after this long talk, you get 5 minutes of a little treat. It's by artist Seth Boyden, a young artist from the United States. And what I like about this is so much that it gives this. You will see it gives life ontological perspective to a stone, and I would hope that the Anthropocene makes us less anthropocentric and more open to viewing the world from the perspective of a stone. I take the Anthropocene to outer space, and with that, I thank you very much.
As somebody who's coming from the humanities, obviously, perhaps we place an overemphasis on language. So, I'm willing to admit my disciplinary formation and kind of cede some territory there. But I'm wondering how much it matters that it's called the Anthropocene. Because obviously, in the past few years, not so much since the beginning of the coining of the term or the beginning of its real inception as a proposed geological category, but since then there's been all kinds of proliferations of different different namings of
Yeah.
the scene, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, Capitalocene being probably the most widely recognized, but also Technocene, Eurocene, white supremacy scene. I'm trying to think if I've run across other ones. You know, like there's this whole proliferation of categories, right? And in part to account for the problem of the anthropos that you pointed to, which was the problem of the designation of the human and the humans being responsible. But also that the anthropos, as Donna Haraway points out, is a term for the human that means etymologically the one who looks up to the sky, as opposed to a different etymological root, at least in English, that has a much closer association with the word humus.
Humus, right.
Which is actually, you know, the embeddedness of, you know, creatures in the earth and all of those kinds of things. So I'm wondering how much you think the naming, the use of the anthropos as the designation frames the kinds of conversations that we're going to be having around this, and perhaps, you know, influencing the ways in which we might be thinking about it, either in the directions that you're hoping for or not.
Yeah, that's, I think, very important question. It's just that, you know, think of the one alternative, the Capitalocene or capitalism scene, or the age of capitalism. Now, big question is, what do we think about capitalism? Do we think it's wrong, or is just this particular kind of capitalism we have, is that the wrong culture of capitalism, and so on? But what the problem here is, I think, is that whatever we call it, we have to live with for a long time. So there won't be no name change for at least, you know, I mean, unless we start to rotate the geological names year after year, but I don't think this will happen. So if you name it after the problem, then you kind of eternalize the problem in a sense. So you give capitalism the rule over the future in the good sense or bad sense. And I would fear that the guys who would really like this would sit in Wall Street and in the city, because then the geological epoch is named after them. Great. we can go on and do things and rule the planet. Of course, there is this problem that the anthropos doesn't name the responsibility for the major problems that feed into the Anthropocene diagnosis. But I would hope that whatever the name is expresses more an idea of the future than a kind of judgment of the past, because we want to overcome the problems that are caused by uncontrolled short-term capitalism. We want to overcome the problems caused by a white male-dominated world, and so on. So perhaps the approach would be better to try and give it an angle that is productive for the future. Now, is Anthropocene then the right angle? You described correctly that it is anthropos, so tropos is a direction, and an is the other direction, which is basically the idea that most animals look to the earth, and we look, we are directed in the other direction. And this is, of course, the whole debate, which I think is really important, ever since the first image we got from planet Earth from outside, this godlike perspective on the Earth. Has it really helped us? Has Google Earth really helped environmental thinking? So this is, I really just quote from discussions we had in the HKW, which I think are inspired by Donaway, to sort of this looking down on is almost an arrogant perspective, whereas the really good would be this humus perspective from within, right? Then the question is, of course, can't we use it as I mean, then it would be the homocene, perhaps, that would equally work. Yeah, I'm not tied to a particular word. Perhaps that would be better, homocene, because that really comes from the earth, right? So you see, I have no conclusive judgment on this, and I just think that this longing to find the guilty party in this and name the epoch after it is not good, because then what if we have overcome it? We still call it Capitolocene? No. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was a fantastic talk. We've just been through an election in England, and it was really difficult to decide who to vote for, but if you went for president of the world, I think I'd vote for you, for sure. So,
there shouldn't be such a position.
I know. Yeah. Can I just say that I've got so many questions. It was such a thought-provoking paper, but I'm only going to ask one. And this is drawing from the cartoon at the end. And the idea, well, the fact, of course, that we are now exchanging materials with material from Earth with material from the moon, and we're bringing back stuff from the moon. We're also proliferating artifacts throughout the solar system. And you only have to look at what's orbiting around the Earth at the moment.
Yeah.
And some of that will stay out for a long time on a geological timescale. I believe that in the outer orbits that we tend to park stuff that we don't need anymore. Yeah. It will stay out for about 10,000 years or something like that. So my question is really, is there a sense in which this goes beyond all ideas of planetary boundaries and limits, and actually is truly extraordinary because it's more a geological epoch of the solar system. I mean, actually, perhaps we have always lived in epochs of the solar system because there's so much interchange anyway between space material and Earth material. You know, we receive so much from space. So my question is, should this be regarded as more than just an Earth epoch?
Yes, super. That's a very cool dimension of it. Have you seen Interstellar, the movie? Yeah? Okay. Who has seen Interstellar? Okay, many. Good. Then I can talk about the movie. So what I loved a lot of the imageries the film produced, the other planets and the warp, and particularly the library and everything. But it embodied this horrible idea of using space in a perfect way when at the end you had the space station floating around, and the first thing the guy notices when he looked out of the window was an American suburban setting with people playing baseball or something, a corn monoculture, and the same stuff that has caused Earth to die in the movie is replicated in space, right? So this is the idea of NASA escapism in a sense, that, you know, we can pretty much kill Earth and we have this emergency exit. That's what I don't like about the spaceship Earth metaphor at all. Because it kind of mechanizes that whole thing, and it creates this, it's part of, for me, it's part of this ideology that we will destroy Earth and escape it in a sense, yeah. So that, I want just to describe a horrible scenario, you know, destroying Earth and leaving to another place. But then there's, I think, this beautiful space scenario you already described. And I mean, living in cities, we don't see this anymore. I've just taken my kids to the Berlin Planetarium, and we were looking into this spectacular night sky, and then they started to project the mythological stories that our ancestors saw in the skies when the Gaia or Demeter arrives in spring, right? So I'm not talking about astrology, but really astronomy, where these guys observed the skies for hundreds of years, and then they saw the story of a fertility goddess coming up on the sky, right? So the sky was this cinema, 3D cinema, and you saw the stories tell the linkage between like the sun and us, for example. That's why I also think that the sun religion from the Egyptians should be revitalized, because that is, I think it was a really good thing, the religion of light and the sun. And so these stories of connection with space, and we have we have cut ourselves off them. I mean, it's really weird that science is going deeper and deeper into space, but our culture is separating itself mentally more and more from space because we don't see the skies, and then people think of horoscopes and astrology and think sky is strange. And so to reconnect with that energy, which is real, which is measurable, right, would be a really good thing, and to perhaps create new stories for us. And then this idea of extending the Anthropocene to other, like we've seen it in the little movie. We already do that with that amazing sonde that landed on the comet 500 million kilometers away. So in a sense, the Anthropocene is already 500 million kilometers from Earth, because a piece of human machinery made from Earth resources has been put on a comet 500 million kilometers away. It's incredible, right? So this links, we should talk about this over a beer, I think. For me, this links to this whole consciousness question, but this is sort of beyond Anthropocene. I met a couple of neuroscientists last year, Christoph Koch at the Paul Allen Institute. He has 1 billion euros to spend on brain research. And from Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder, and Antonio Tononi in Madison, Wisconsin, very esteemed brain researcher. And they pursue this idea of the consciousness, pervasive consciousness. So they developed this idea of consciousness telescopes, where when you look, you don't see the real space, but you see consciousness space. So like if you look at a garden where an owl sits, the trees are very small, but the owl is huge if you look through that telescope, because it has a form of consciousness, right? So if you look into space, perhaps you find some structures that are abiotic, but are still conscious because they are complex enough. So you would look through the voids and perhaps start to see consciousness in space. But now you think I'm crazy, right? This is hardcore science, natural science. Yeah. Integrated information theory.
Okay, if we go crazy, one could add as well that there is a lot of things going on in artificial life, artificial intelligence and robotics. And so how long will the human be integer in a way, you know, or then composite, you know? So it's even probably in 50 years, you know, it's a mixed situation, which might be controlled by the machine as well. And then the whole thing turns a little. Yeah.
Then we will be ruled by geology, because the machines are built of. And we have the ultimate geological. That might actually then be a seriously new geological epoch. If there are self-replicating, self-sustaining, intelligent machines that extract resources automatically, build new artificial intelligence automatically, that would certainly put a very fast end to the Anthropocene, perhaps. Or I just did a story for Geo magazine on artificial intelligence. I went to Silicon Valley, and then I visited this guy at the Swiss artificial intelligence lab. And his idea is that the machines will want to leave Earth because it's too wet for them here, because they start to rust too fast here, and they have a natural drive to leave this wet soup here and go into space and replicate themselves in space and leave us humans behind on Earth. I don't know what I would prefer, really, but so far, I mean, if you talk to Siri now, it's very funny, I think, but not very helpful. So the intelligence at the moment is at least what we see, but probably the NSA and, I mean, the whole purpose of Google is to build an artificial intelligence. We all think they want to help us with answering questions, but we are feeding the artificial intelligence of Google, of course. And that's the whole purpose of the company, to build an artificial intelligence, nothing else. And there you have, I mean, you don't have machine power behind it, but human power behind it, because they have this singularity ideology where basically you as technology rules the world. That's the ideology behind it. And so I would, at the moment, more see human power behind artificial intelligence, but then, you know, if you watch Ex Machina, who has seen that? Ex Machina? British film, just out, go see it, it's great, because no, I will not give away the story. Go see it, it's great. Yeah, but yeah, so that's an alternative scenario. Perhaps because the last, so until like 5-6 years ago, I was kind of stuck, but they hit gold, algorithmic gold. And it's going so fast that, you know, record your conversation with Siri now, and then go back in 5 years, 10 years, and it might scare the hell out of you, what it knows about you, us in particular, not only individuals, but societies.
But there's a second thing, like in molecular biology, you know, they just managed to reverse like cell differentiation. So like you can go back from a differentiated cell to a stem cell, yeah, and then you can use it as a building material to differentiate every other cell out of it. So I mean, we are actually right now already in a kind of engineering mode, you know, so there's not a coherent human being.
So big question is really, and what and this is, it's happening now, and we can, you know, it happens in front of our very eyes, is the question, are we seeing the total industrialization of life through AI, which will turn us into happy, perfect consumers of life, and through synthetic biology, which will bring forth factories of life. I recommend reading Alfred Diblin's Berge, Meere and Giganten. It's very much a book that describes this future. Or is there a move towards in a sense, this biologization is a word that brings up very negative connotations because of Nazi past and eugenics and so on. But what I mean with it is a love for life, not selection of life, but a deep culturally rooted love and respect and humility towards the life. Yeah. Or do we bring this into the game? Otherwise, the total industrialization of everything will take place. So it's very good that you connect the two lines, synthetic biology and AI. Yeah.
I think even if you come back to the first lecture, you know, where we learned that we have to love the accident, then, you know, if we consider biology happening, you know, because mutation is more or less accident. Yeah. And every thing that is done right now is to control and instrumentalize any environment, you know, so it's pretty far from going into the direction you're suggesting.
Yes. Yeah.
There's the opposite way to migrate nature into our machines. We say, okay, machines have to migrate into nature. Yeah.
What is the idea of believing in the sun and have a different
in what?
Believing in the sun as God.
Yeah, I just think of it as a form of deep, well, not as God, but what I want to say is this, we heard the wonderful word analog dust at the end of your lecture, right? And in a time where our attention is so much colonized by digital space, I always see the positive side of it as well. I'm not anti-digital at all. But I have this fear that in the future some young kids will go into a forest and they will say, oh, this is great software and it's programmed really well and the pixels are great, so that the digital kind of becomes the first nature in a sense, and the analog becomes the second nature, right? So I loved what you said about the analog dust, and this is just another way of saying it, that this deep analog feeling for the forces that sustain us, and I mean the sun is the most important source of energy and for everything for us, and that we take it serious, that we not, because natural science has kind of denuded nature in a sense, by compartmentalizing it, I can't see why, or I can't understand, I've covered science now for 25 years and I've encountered so many natural scientists who keep saying it's just physics, it's just chemistry, it's just this or just that. And this just nur in Deutsch, yeah, it's almost an ideology in itself, this kind of disrespectful, derogatory perception of physical, chemical, biological forces. And this has made our world very empty and very dead and very cold. And so that's what I meant by revitalizing materialism, that
But Christian,
yep.
the first proposal would be that we need a second sun, that there is no night on the earth anymore, and or like in Las Vegas where the day, it's just daylight and no night. Or, you know, this is it's a very interesting point, but to think it as in a religious or in a belief, or but I just wanted to so also there I think that the first thing is have a second sun, no night anymore. So, just wanted to.
But most mammals on Earth are night animals, so it would mean the extinction of most mammals, yes. 90% of mammals.
So maybe we have to discuss.
Other questions? No? So thanks very much, Christian Schwäger. We heard a lot and get a lot of ideas, and tomorrow it's maybe more about the resistance of material. I feel something like that, to hear something about rivers and the drifting and floating and things, and then maybe about these accidents happening in these movements. So I'm very excited to welcome you tomorrow again at 4 o'clock. It's the time, or? It's at 4 o'clock. And for the discussion, the round table, I think there are a lot of points of discussing which are not ended tonight with a beer, but maybe we'll see. So see you tomorrow. Thanks very much for your patience.
Thank you.